Thank you so much. We're so excited that everyone's here together today. Thank you so much for joining us for our discussion on resilience. Just a note that we will be recording today's session and we'll make that available for view online afterwards. So when we think about 2020, obviously 2020 has been such a big year of change with this pandemic. We've seen an immense impact in our daily lives, in our communities, and in our Chinatowns. And as we all know, Chinatowns have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Small businesses have been struggling, many residents aren't able to pay rent, but there's also the concern about being targets of hate crimes, right? I mean, we've had these xenophobic notions of the Chinese virus or the Kung flu and all these other amazing things that our soon to be former President Trump has said about our communities. But this rise in anti-Asian sentiment has had an extremely destructive effect on our communities. We've also, in addition, encountered uncertainties with new city policies on how businesses can conduct themselves, as well as what city resources are actually available. And these policies have really been changing moment to moment, which has generated a lot of confusion. But in the face of all of these challenges, different Chinatown groups have come together to support and uplift our communities. And here today in this discussion, we'll be focused on the relief efforts and creative approaches to navigate these ever-changing pandemic policies. And today we have these amazing group of panelists. They'll be sharing stories and notes centered around community empowerment. Thinking more positively, more optimistically now, the questions we're asking are, what does 2021 hold for us, and how do we keep Chinatown alive? I will just mention that this discussion, of course, doesn't account for many other incredible Chinatown groups across North America out there, but I'm super excited and extremely grateful to have the voices of New York's Chinatown, of which I'm a resident, Toronto's Chinatown, Calgary's Chinatown, and Seattle's Chinatown here today. This program, Resilience, was organized in conjunction with an exhibition that's currently on view at the Chinese American Arts Council, also known as Gallery 456 in New York. This show currently up features works by my fellow colleagues, Patricia Cazorla and Nancy Saleme, as well as myself. It's called What Really Defines Us. It's complicated. It's a show that explores issues of racial identity and labor within the Asian American and Latin American diaspora. This show was actually installed in February of 2020. We thought it would be up for a month. We never expected it to be up for a year. So the show is still currently up, and we're extremely grateful to the gallery for hosting our work during this time. You can still actually visit the show. The gallery is open from Monday through Friday from 1 to 6 p.m. And now I'm just going to introduce Alan Chow. He's the founder and director of the Chinese American Arts Council and Gallery 456. He's just going to say a couple of words about the gallery's mission and the show.
Hello, everybody. This is Alan Chow. Can you hear me? This is Alan Chow. I'm from Chinese American Arts Council, Gallery 456. I want to thank you for the 3 artists. They have an entire year of the exhibition. It's a very, very popular. And then I want to say Happy New Year. Why? Because another 3 weeks will be a Chinese Lunar Year and in February. So welcome and have a good time, and we have a good discussion. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alan. Just a note also that it is last year was the 45th anniversary of the gallery. It was one of the first spaces in New York to really focus on showing Asian and Asian American art. So now let's just get started. Just a little bit about the format today. I'm going to ask a couple of questions that each of the different Chinatowns will answer in turn. In general, we'll be just moving from East Coast to West Coast through the different Chinatowns. After that, we'll have a couple of group questions opening up for the group, and then we'll end with some Q&A. And you as the audience are invited to type in any questions you might have into the chat box. So just to ground us a bit, to our amazing Chinatowns. Give us a bit of a brief intro of yourself, your city, and your organization. Tell us about your organization's structure, its goals, and your role in it. Jennifer from Welcome to Chinatown, would you like to start?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in on this Friday evening. My name is Jennifer Tam. I'm one of the co-founders of Welcome to Chinatown. We are a grassroots organization that is actually relatively new. We just started in March, and really as a response in the face to COVID and its impact, both COVID and the impact of both COVID and xenophobia that has had an impact on Manhattan's Chinatown. So I am based in New York City. I'm also a resident of Manhattan, Chinatown, and Welcome to Chinatown's mission is very core to supporting the small businesses of Manhattan, Chinatown. To date, we have raised over $650,000 in organic fundraising, something that we are really proud of because of just the rallying cry and community support that has poured out for this neighborhood. But also looking forward, we are trying to understand where our work continues in the space of Manhattan, Chinatown, and how we can continue to serve as an advocate for the neighborhood, seeing that there's still a long journey ahead. One of the things that really excited me about joining this panel when Cheryl invited us was knowing that we were in the good company of folks like Jamie from Sepeda and Wellington from the Chinatown bid. These were folks that we talked to very early on when Welcome to Chinatown started. And so really a hat tip to everybody involved for all the incredible efforts that they have done to serve their Chinatowns in different ways.
Wellington?
Yeah, same here. This is Wellington Chen. I'm the Executive Director of the Chinatown Business Improvement District, as well as Chinatown Partnership. Both are nonprofits, 501c3s with independent board of directors that guide us along with many advisors and volunteers such as you and Jennifer. And by the way, hats off to Cheryl. For those of you that are enjoying the benches that are sitting on Doyer Street and Pell Street, the artistic artwork, that is her donation together with her husband. We picked it up from her Brooklyn studio, and I'm glad she's a resident of this Chinatown. But hello to everyone else on the thing. But as Jennifer correctly mentioned, this is unprecedented. The losses are huge. At this moment, before we began, we were chatting. There are about 500,000 independent restaurants that are on the line and 11 million jobs at stake. So far, we have lost 372,000 restaurants and bars across this industry, not just in this Chinatown. For our Chinatown Business Improvement District, we are one of the 76 business improvement districts. It's good to see my other colleagues from other parts of North America. There are 10 Chinatowns that are part of the BIA, Business Improvement Area, or whatever it's called. We're part of the network of over 2,000 business improvement professionals around the world. So we're very glad. We have a huge district. We have about 3,000 tenants, commercial tenants of all sorts. We lost count. We believe there are more before people come and go. We have about 2,500 property owners. And so it is a daunting challenge to cover this vast district. The bid was formed after 6 years of effort post 9/11 to create supplemental services for cleaning. And I'm very proud of that. During the hunker down period when the whole town was a ghost town, our workers were out there 364 days a year, power washing, not just with cold water, hot water, and not just with hot water, but also with sanitizer to kill the germs and the degreaser. And so all of those, I will go on later on, but I'm very, very pleased with all the support. So many people came out of work wanting to help Chinatown, but at this moment, the biggest thing that we really need is the $120 billion Restaurant Revitalization Act that Congress is contemplating. The real number is actually above 185 billion. And so because we lost 67 million tourists for New York City since last year, we're losing about 300,000 daytime workers. Out of 300,000, we only have 10% coming to work every day. Most of us are not like me sitting in my office right now. Most of them are working from home. And then we lost about 4 million riders a day. We have 5.5 million subway riders. Currently, we are at 1.6 million, which means that we're losing about 76% of our riders, along with other bridges and tunnel and the Metro North and Long Island Railroad, the suburban rail lines. So I could go on.
We'll get further into all of that
Yeah.
further on in the questions. And just to note also that Wellington is an amazing a source of knowledge of many different statistics and facts. He's got like 9 billion of them in his head. So definitely ask him questions at the end about that. Annie and Shelley, give us a little bit of intro about Friends of Chinatown, Toronto.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Shelley, and I'm here with Annie Wong today, and we're both here as members of Friends of Chinatown, Toronto. We're based on Treaty 13 territory, and we're a group comprised largely of artists, architects, writers, journalists, business owners, and residents. And we're largely focused on being community activists, fighting for things such as community-controlled affordable housing, economic justice, and racial justice in Toronto's Chinatown. Like New York, it sounds like we're also a relatively new group, and we just celebrated our 1-year birthday, so we're still quite young. And our mission is really kind of just to build community power as a group together. FOCT is led by a nuclear team of about 15 people who largely works in the decision-making capacity, with a larger volunteer network of about 40 people. And so from our nuclear team and our general team, we have folks who work on various committees and projects together, which we can get into a bit more later. But some of our committees include exploring a community land trust, which is something we're doing right now, programming, comms, social media, press, and we also have a meme team, which I'm quite proud of. Annie, anything to add?
No, you covered everything.
Okay.
Calgary's Chinatown, Alice from I Love YYC, and then Terry of the Calgary BIA.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alice. I just wanted to say how happy I am to be on this call because it's just such a different type of Zoom call from all the other work-related and board-related Zoom calls I have to be on. It feels like I'm coming home to like a family where people, we all have a collective love of Chinatowns, and it just like warms my heart so much. And it's too bad that I never met any of you when I was living in New York, because I think that a lot of the work that I do in Chinatown now is inspired by my time in New York and Brooklyn, experiencing those Chinatowns. So hopefully after the pandemic, we can all get together one day. So I'm a board member of I Love YYC Chinatown. We have about officially 6 board members, and it's super grassroots. We are registered not-for-profit. However, it's very decentralized, like just basically whoever has an idea or whoever wants to have an initiative, we just do it. And it's under this banner of I Love YYC Chinatown. I think how our role has evolved over the past 5 years is that we're now kind of seen as like the bridge between Chinese residents and Chinese tongs and things like that, and also the city of Calgary and the other charities that want to get involved with Chinatown. So kind of like the younger generation, a lot of people like to say that we're the neutral Switzerland of Chinatown, which we don't agree with because we're pretty much activists ourselves. But I guess we don't have as much history in the neighborhood as some of the other organizations. And so people are more willing to kind of collaborate and talk to us. And I work very closely with Terry Wong from the BIA that we have in Calgary as well. And so that's more so on the businesses and ensuring that they survive, and Terry will talk about that. One initiative that we have been doing, which has been very helpful in kind of building the understanding of Chinatown's history with the city of Calgary, is through our Chinatown historic tours. So that's something that I focus on personally a lot, and leading those tours, and maybe I'll be able to talk about that further. So that's basically it.
Terry?
Sorry, I muted myself. I'm Terry Wong, Executive Director of the Chinatown Business Improvement Area in Calgary here. And as you can see, Chinatown welcomes you. We are, like everybody else, under the malaise of the pandemic. in addition to that, Calgary's been also under a couple other, I'll say detriments. One of which is the oil and gas economy kind of collapsed on us when the price of oil dropped, and as such, Chinatown being so close to downtown, we also suffer the loss of the downtown businesses in addition to the pandemic. Chinatown BIA was formed in 2015, subsequent to a catastrophic flood that we had in Calgary back in 2013, where over half of Chinatown was flooded. And much the same as what New York went through, we had to go through the same sort of cleanup process and brought out a lot of volunteers. Where we are today in terms of our community, in addition to dealing with the pandemic, and that is trying to knit together all the different community associations, cultural associations, business associations, and have effectively one unified voice to Chinatown. We've suffered some different sort of opinions as to what Chinatown is all about and what the meaning of the culture has been to the city and tourists as such. Working with the city of Calgary, we've established a Tomorrow's Chinatown initiative. There's about a $500,000 consultation going on right now to create a Chinatown cultural plan, which will then lead us to a local area plan, or which is basically guidance to urban development in Chinatown. So again, are we looking at low to mid-size buildings? Are we looking at high rises? What sort of residential commercial mix? That's the, if I could use the term, the revitalization and renovation of our Chinatown that we're going through right now. So, and I see some of my other Calgary Chinese colleagues on board. So I'm glad you're joining us as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. What about Jamie from Seattle's Chinatown?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Lee, and I'm from Seattle, Washington, up here on the West Coast. I'm with the Seattle Chinatown International District Preservation Development Authority, which is maybe the longest name ever. So our Chinatown is actually not just a Chinatown. We are a little Saigon, a Japantown, a historic Manila town, and just kind of everything in between. My organization has been around for 45 years, actually 46 now. This is 2021. And we are a community development organization. Our main thing that we do is we house our seniors and our families in our neighborhood. We have about 400 plus residents that we do house and manage their properties, but we also have external facing programs, including business assistance, public space, public safety, and advocacy for a lot of the residents and the businesses and the visitors, the CID, as we call it for short, the Chinatown International District. I'm the director of community initiatives here, and I've been here for about 7 years. And really, I manage all of our programs that are outward facing and that do advocacy for our residents and our businesses within the neighborhood. I'll get a little bit more into kind of, what we have been doing during the pandemic, but we work with a wide range of organizations within the Chinatown ID, including our own BIA that we have, the CID BIA, the Chinese family associations that are here. We have a health clinic that is also in our neighborhood that we work really closely with, social service places, and then we are the home of the Wing Luke Museum, which is one of the only Pan-Asian museums on the West Coast here in Seattle.
Thanks so much. So that was a great introduction. Now, if all the Chinatown groups can just answer these questions in order, again, moving from East Coast to West Coast, starting with New York, Toronto, Calgary, and then Seattle. So tell us what the situation has been in 2020 in your Chinatown. What have been some of the biggest issues your Chinatown has faced? Why is there a fire truck going down the street right now?
Perfect timing.
Right? I'm like, so tell us what the situation has been in 2020 in your Chinatown. What have been the biggest issues your Chinatown has faced? What is the current situation now? Who has been impacted and how? Just give us an overview of these things, starting from New York, Jennifer and Wellington.
Yeah, so great question. And actually, Cheryl, you answered the question by your opening statement, which is if there are two words to describe it, is obviously the uncertainties and how do you adjust for the changes, because it's a tumultuous year. And this is not since 1918. We have never been through something like this. None of us, I don't believe, were around in 1918. And so this is a unprecedented. So for us, it is about a multi-year, multi-phasing. I think initially it was a shock that to see 1,000 banquets canceled, which is that because Asians were very smart. Now that we know, they wore masks early on before anybody put on the mask. They start staying home, even if they are free 10-course dinners, 12-course dinner, they start staying home. They will not come out even for free banquets. And so we start noticing very early on that the banquet halls, the tables, the free banquets seats are not being filled. Lunar New Year, like not Lunar New Year, even New Year's Eve dinners are not, the banquet halls are empty. The restaurants are canceling, postponing their dinners. And so, and then February 7th, it was the worst day, which is that we noticed for sure that all the restaurant noticed there's a steep dive in terms of number of foot traffic. People stop coming. And so we launched, similar to this year, we launched a Show Some Love in Chinatown, promoting Chinatown by encouraging people to come down here and show a receipt, and you can get an iPhone, you can get a lot of donated, including our chair, who's sitting listening in the audience. He donated jewelry, he donated a lot of things, so we get the RSVP, the VSOP liquor and all of that things. But I would say that the ability to adapt is the key trademark, I would say, for this year. It's not just for us. This is a tumultuous roller coaster. And what we did was we launched immediately upon hearing in March that you had to not be able to dine in. The most you can do is to do delivery or takeouts, which is Chinese. Most of the Chinatown restaurants are not meant for that. It's communal meal. You're supposed to share, sit down one dish at a time. We, out of the 300 restaurants that we surveyed last year, 312, only about 100 something remain open. And by April, it was down to about something like 29 was still open. So in March, as soon as we ordered to shelter in place, our entire team plus some of the volunteers created what is called air support, air tables. And what we did was we scour around to see who's still open. If you need your pharmacy, prescription.
Wellington, I will just say the next question, we are going to talk about some of the relief efforts. So, and
Yeah,
I'd
okay.
love to hear so much more detail about that. So just in this current question, if you could just like basically lay out what's the current situation for
Okay,
New York.
so in a nutshell, despite the overwhelming support of so many good-hearted people, volunteers, donors, philanthropists, government policy, government officials, and all of that, our sitting diner is down about 80%. That gives you some. We are a sitting diner. We're about a sub 20% of what we were in 2019. That gives you the magnitude of where we are in a nutshell.
And just to add on to what Wellington is saying, from what we surveyed across just businesses at large within the community, foot traffic is still significantly down. Obviously, I think this is an impact across all businesses across the U.S., but particularly within Chinatown, we have heard that businesses are still suffering a loss of up to 80% on average, loss in foot traffic and in sales, where Ting's, which is one of the oldest trinket stores in Chinatown, they opened up for a full month without a single customer. So where Chinatown really needs its support right now in today's landscape is more support from our public offices, our elected officials who have been working towards relief funds, but we are still asking for that that they provide more relief support to Chinatown specifically, because historically we have been left behind. And so that's one of the things that we are fighting for right now with the LMI storefront loan, where zip code 113 has been left out, and wanting to ensure that Chinatown does not get left behind for funding that is intended to be for things like minority-owned businesses, immigrant-dominated populations, and neighborhoods like Chinatown.
In a way, Terry, I just want to echo what Jennifer said. What Terry Wong said about Calgary, we're very similar. We are not close to, we are very close to the central business district. And if the daytime office workers are not coming, we're out of luck. So we are out 270,000, 280,000 office workers a day. that gives you the sense of magnitude and share among 300 restaurants.
Annie and Shelley, what's the current situation in Toronto? What are the biggest issues Toronto Chinatown has faced in 2020? Who's been impacted?
So probably like the majority of Chinatowns here today, our neighborhoods were hit really early on with associations of COVID-19 and Chinese communities. So we went into lockdown in, I think, March, but by now those racial associations and a decline in our businesses was seen around this time. You know, Asian people were wearing masks first to protect others, but this was almost seen as a self-marker of otherness in many ways. And so a lot of things that have been happening since then are some long-term care homes in our communities. Once the pandemic really hit, really struggled with lack of PPE and staff to be able to adequately support this. Our businesses definitely had some trouble transitioning as well. From a cash model to an online model, for instance, was a big adjustment. And kind of like what you mentioned earlier, Cheryl, as well as adapting with like the constantly changing regulations and what that means for businesses. Can they stay open? Can they not stay open? Et cetera, et cetera. We had a bylaw officer reach out to us once and basically tell us that they were enforcing this really punitive measure of fining Chinese bakeries because they used a self-serve model, even though they had acknowledged that they had basically inadequately reached out to these companies who largely operated in languages other than English. So there was a real lack of communication with those communities. And so language services are a huge thing that FOCT is a big advocate for. Toronto's city slogan is "Diversity is our strength," even though systemically it does not support it in a way that actually mirrors that slogan. And a bit more background about FOCT in particular. So we organized around gentrification and development in our community. And so housing is constantly at the center of a big issue that we experience here, with developers coming into our neighborhoods, proposing large story developments that are really unaffordable to both businesses and current residents and the income levels that sort of operate there. And so I can get into this a bit more in detail later on, but definitely housing is a continued issue that has been really exacerbated in our city, and development models keep moving forward despite much more pressing issues about recovery in relation to the pandemic.
I can add also, we've seen a loss of legacy businesses. Burama, which was like a cornerstone business that has a bakery that has been around in Chinatown for over 20 years, recently shut down. We had outbreaks in senior centers, and also the loss and shutdown of community centers, which offered so many important social services. Many seniors in Chinatown already face a lot of social isolation. And so the pandemic has had numerous also emotional effects on the seniors who live there. And yeah, and to echo Shelley, and we'll talk about this more in the next question, development continues in the state of pandemic, and that is, I think, a pressing issue for us.
So in Calgary's Chinatown, we've been very grateful for a lot of government subsidies for businesses. I don't know, I guess Terry could speak more to that, but something that really helped the nonprofits in the neighborhood who work directly with seniors, like the Calgary Elderly Citizens Association, is that they were able to receive funding to kind of bring their programs online and to hire staff and have a large number of volunteers who weren't having to go to work at the time, who could train seniors on how to use smartphones, tablets, that kind of thing, to still stay connected on programs. So the isolation in that aspect has been relatively okay. Like the general sentiment, they're sad that they don't see their families, that they can't physically see them, but I would say that it almost seems like their family members are being more connected, especially with the seniors. Like they're checking in on them more, they're dropping things off more frequently because now there's no other option. A few of our senior buildings were completely on lockdown to visitors from the outside for many months. And so they pivoted to create social distance recreational programs. I know the new gallery members are here on this call today, and they did like an art painting session with them. For us with I Love YYC Chinatown, 2020 was going to be our year to actually do some really cool programming, and it all got halted because of the lockdowns. But you know, with the one good thing that came out of the pandemic is like there were more people who had the time to actually talk about community building, like private landowners, private businesses who were saying, you know, actually now is a good time for you to do this kind of a concept, and how can I support it? And in the same time, this year, the city has launched what they call the Chinatown Advisory Committee. So we're trying to create a cultural plan, a statutory well, I don't know if it's statutory, but a document for that kind of inform city planning on how the culture of Chinatown should be preserved and how it should be considered with regards to development and arts and culture. And so there's been a lot of good conversations on that. I think the challenge for Chinatown right now is that we've had a lot of years of kind of trauma and a lot of years of fighting for Chinatown against gentrification, against just to maintain our neighborhoods and to plan it in the way that we see fit. And so there's a lot of animosity between city council, especially the current council, because they've been there for 4 years, kind of the, you know, around the time when all this drama came out. And so yesterday we had a meeting and they asked us, like, what would it take to kind of mend these relationships? And honestly, like, it's never been an issue with administration. Like, they've always been really great and inclusive and stuff. It's always at the council, at the public hearing, when it's like, okay, are you going to allow this 40-story building to get built? And through all the lobbying efforts and everything, we think they say no. And then at the last minute, when it comes to a vote, they say yes, right? So that is a major like slap in the face for all the Chinatown community members and businesses and architects and people who have worked so hard on this stuff. And so I don't know what it would take to mend those relationships other than counselors being like apologizing, honestly, for being racist and not listening. And now this year with Black Lives Matters and everything happening in the US, like that's trickled down into Calgary. And a lot of the conversation around city council has been like, okay, well, how do we become more inclusive? How do we listen? How do we do anti-racist training? And so we're just kind of seeing how far that will go and whether that will make a change so that the next time an immigrant stands at a public hearing, like you're not going to roll your eyes at them, right? So yeah, I'll let Terry go now.
That's good. Thanks, House. So again, I neglected to say earlier that the I Love YYC Chinatown is an up and coming force in Chinatown, and all of the associations, including the BI, really appreciates the work of Alice and her group. Chinatown, and so I should also say, Cheryl, thank you for the title of this forum, because resilience is really what I wanted to speak about in Calgary here. We've had, as everybody suffered through, you know, the pandemic and suffered through the downturn in terms of the commercial retail sectors and the vacancies and everything else and such. But the other side of the equation, the positive side of the equation, I think I want to echo, is that a lot of the associations are coming together. They're actually coming together, banding together on a common cause, working towards common sort of goals, objectives, and everything else. The other side of the equation, which Alice referred to as well, we've had a fortunate in Canada here, the fortunate ability of having federal government and provincial government, you know, supports in place. Some will say may not be adequate or comprehensive, but it is probably better than a lot of other, you know, jurisdictions across the United States. So that has been a great assistance to us as well. We've also been very, and in Calgary's Chinatown particularly, we were alerted right after New Year's about the possible pandemic. And so we've been working with our Alberta Health Services and our Ministry of Health on a number of different things, to the point that, you know, and I've got a few other colleagues on the line here, that we have still not heard, you know, in terms of BI or community associations, of any of our residents or any of our businesses, individuals affected by COVID. In other words, we have been COVID-free in this community, largely because we banded together. We're the first community came out with putting on masks, first community to start telling people to sanitize, keep their restaurants and everything clean. First community to start telling everybody that Chinatown is clean and safe. And we've been vigilant in doing that. And that resilience has allowed us to, you know, to keep our head above water. We do have, you know, obviously vacancies. We do have some business shutdowns, but not to the extent that other Chinatowns I'm hearing has been. And I think one of the unique things that we have here, a lot of our businesses are owner occupied properties. So therefore, if you own the property, you're less inclined to walk away from your business. You're going to do your best to keep your business open. And even if you have to downsize your staffing, supplement your staffing with family staffing, that has been what's been going on. The positive side of the equation to support them is that the BIA has really gone out on a social media campaign, really pushed on Instagram and Facebook and websites and everything else, contests, online contests, giveaways, whatever else, to keep people, coming to Chinatown, and thereby, again, these signage and everything else are physical things. In terms of a boom, which I never thought would ever happen, but we've had probably about 3 new bubble tea places open like in 1 month type of thing. And Chinatown has been a destination place for the young people. The seniors have stayed away, as Wellington is referred to. A lot of the cultural associations that the seniors have stayed away, but we've seen a resurgence of kids who want to come downtown and experience something different. So to what Alice is referring to, our future cultural plan will be targeting more so to new experiences. Thank you.
Thank you. So here in Seattle, I remember last year, right around this time when we were planning our Lunar New Year events, this is the last event we all got. This is the picture behind me. It was our Lunar New Year event from last year. That we were getting at questions of, I serve on the board of the BIA in addition to my role in my job, and like, were we gonna shut down the event? And this was in February, and we were like, no, like, people assuming that just because it's Chinese people that, that we would have the virus. And then of course, as you all know, Kirkland, Washington was one of the first cases in the US, and we had that big outbreak at the senior care facility here. And I remember it was like a Saturday morning when the first person died there, and I looked at my phone and I think an oh crap came in my head. And it was just like, it's in Washington, it's really close. Kirkland's only about 20 minutes outside of Seattle. And so I remember in the early days, like, in addition to housing, we also, house a lot of seniors, as well as house a senior meal program within one of our buildings. And there was a rumor that somebody had got a positive case in the neighborhood, and that that's why they shut the meal program down, because the meal program was shut down unexpectedly. We didn't know why. And I remember there being this, like, it was almost like one of those like tests to how are you going to deal with a crisis that you have know nothing about. And I remember us calling like cleaning companies and figuring out how we were going to clean our properties and make sure things were safe for our seniors. And it ended up that that's not what happened. And somebody had started a rumor, and that person, they shut down just because of safety reasons and all these things. And we remember thinking, okay, we didn't do the best there on that trial run, but how are we going to work to do things better? And then we all know what happened, within the coming months. And as everything started to close down, and in March, I think is when our governor put the stay-at-home order. And so for us, I think I echo a lot of what folks said. A lot of our restaurants had to shut down, had to move to takeout, had to bring themselves online. And it was a really difficult thing. And certain restaurants just shut down completely for a long time, thinking that, we were all hopeful that we'd be back in May or we'd be back in June or something like that. A lot of our seniors, as everybody has said, stayed at home and they were not coming out. Our food bank actually had to close in the neighborhood because it's in a trailer, and it was too small to have volunteers safely be able to sort food. And so we had to start thinking about food security things. And then, really we're similar to a lot of Chinatowns. We are adjacent to downtown, and we are just south of the downtown core. We're really close to a lot of financial offices and buildings, and all of that just went away. And we are like one of the largest transit hubs west of the Mississippi, where our Chinatown sits. And so we just noticed a huge decline in people coming to the neighborhood, and it was just really hard. And I think people were really scared, and they just didn't know what to do. And so we've really had to, and I'll try not to get too much into relief effort work, but think about how to support our businesses, and like how to, in our neighborhood, like I said, we have a wide range of Asian type businesses, but we really translate things into Vietnamese and to Chinese, and we do Mandarin and Cantonese and Vietnamese to really be able to serve our businesses in the neighborhood, and then as well as some of our residents. So it's been a very interesting way to think about how things have progressed. And then with the social unrest that happened and Black Lives Matter movement that happened in early July and June, and people know, that Seattle had a huge movement that was happening. And I think in some ways, not to get too political, but the way the police handled it, it pushed, you know, looters into Chinatown. And there was actually a night where I think 17 or 18 of our businesses were vandalized. And so it was a big, you know, kind of shift for us, and for us to really think about how do we support the movement while also supporting our businesses and making sure that, you know, everybody is getting their need when it's such a dire time. And so, yeah, it's a little bit from me.
Well, that's a great way to transition to the next question. Describe some of the relief efforts your group has been undertaking in the community. What kind of impact have you seen? Were these one-off endeavors or repeating events? What was the scale of the relief effort? How many different folks have contributed to implementing this effort? Jennifer Wellington, would you like to start us off?
Sure.
Yeah, so just to give some similar to what Jamie just said about vandalism, we unfortunately also have about a dozen stores that were smashed with their storefronts. So I'm very pleased that we started a GoFundMe, and very quickly together, not just the GoFundMe of, I think we raised $55,000 to cover these dozen stores. And one of them was even a Little Italy merchant that is our neighbor that we gave $5,000 to, almost $5,000 to, in addition to cover the smashed glass. But also, the other thing is obviously our operational center that provides supplemental cleaning basically becomes a giant, huge warehouse, because we started getting 6,500 pounds of soil from Governor's Island. So that for outdoor seating and dining, once we find out that it's a possibility to do that, to assure the public the safety, we gave them the buffer, the 18 inches of each one. Each planter is about 300 to 500 pounds. And so to line it up so that when car drive by and you're sitting there having a meal, you'll be assured. We have now a stockpile of heaters, umbrellas, tents, sandbags, gravels, tents, and you know, you name it. And so it's the first time, to my knowledge, we're the only bid in New York that has loaned out. If you can walk there right now, you can see we have barricades. We have barricades to lend out because there are homeless people that will come out to the diner and just and bothering them. So we lend out the barricades. But you know, so we also talked to the airtime. One of the biggest things, the air support, was we went on Sino-Vision and the Chinese radio right away to how to navigate, how to be safe initially, and then how to apply for PPE. And then lately, when the LMI came out, the $35 million loan that the city gave out to the 10002 zip code, the 35 million, my understanding, 76% of the initial applicants were Chinese Americans merchants because of the airwave alert. And then we then also went on a few weeks ago to alert people the deadline's coming up for the $150 million forward loan, which is a 5-year multi-year low interest loan. If you're a nonprofit, you can borrow for 5 years at 2% interest, and then another 3% for 5 years. So my sense is really the airway is a very critical, just like the air table, to get to the air, to say where's the pharmacy open, where's the eatery open, where's the grocery open, where to buy toilet papers. Those are things. And then we provided the base support, the sandbags to anchor down the thing. And then we also created, like similar to thing, we've been entrusted with Chinatown CLT. We created a community land trust, not to the degree that other towns are doing, not to fight gentrification, because we haven't had any condo built south of Canal Street in half a century. It is about trying to relieve the operating pressure, right? This area has to pay 300 million real estate taxes every 12 months. And you multiply by 5, that's what Chinatown sticker shock will be in 5 years, because we will take us to 2024 to come out of this pandemic. And that is built just on not counting the payroll, not counting the insurance, not counting the heating bill, not counting the insurance, not counting the operating, just purely on insurance alone in Chinatown. We have an angels advisor group, and if we include the spillover surrounding area, it's over $400 million a year. So, and obviously, if you have no customers and MTA is down to lost 70% of its ridership. Those are, so the CLT, the Community Land Trust that we are now incorporated this year for the first time under the Chinatown Partnership will be to engage the community. Would you like to come into this harbor to lower your taxes? Or however, maybe defer 100 million, which the city would not want to hear. But obviously the option is there as a nonprofit co-op. And then also to Terry's point, it's very important that we have ownership. Right now, the majority, the bulk of the housing unit in Chinatown are tenement buildings, and they're transient, and people are migrating. People are voting with their feet and just say, I'm out of here. My children deserve something better. They deserve not to have to do the walk up, no elevators, fire hazard. There are no enclosed staircases, and you only have fire barbecue grills outside on the so-called fire escape, right? And so those are the antiquated 18th century, 19th century tenement buildings, and we don't have the ownership, the equity that is here. And so that's why we are, it is a very serious issue because the young needs a place to stay. And when they succeeded, when we spend so much money on their education, they need to come back and have a place to work. And obviously the tenement buildings are not conducive in that. If you want exercise, yes, but not when you have a baby with diaper bottles wanting to go up and down, and especially not fair to the seniors, because the number one thing is about tripping, fail thing. And so one of the things I'm very proud of during this last snowstorm is our workers are out there cleaning not only the fire hydrants, but clearing the corner of snow caps, salting first, and so that the hand trucks can get by. The seniors do not trip on the corner and break their hip or break their bones. It's not worth anything. So I'm very proud of the work that they work 364 days a year. So I can go on and on, but enough for me to shut up.
Thanks, Wellington. Yeah, no, I just wanted to quickly speak on kind of how we have approached our work in recognizing what challenges we're seeing within the neighborhood. And I think one thing that is really what has helped us propel within the initiatives that we have done is taking a look at different parts of the ecosystem within Chinatown. So whether it was food insecurity or lack of books and educational resources for public school students in Chinatown and LES, we really took it as an approach of pinpointing an issue oftentimes surfaced by other members, NGOs, grassroots organizations within Chinatown that are flagging to us, like in the example of a recent book drive we did in partnership with Immigrant Social Services. They have been serving the Chinatown Lower East Side community for decades now, and they noticed that within their students, because libraries have been closed, oftentimes these are students coming from low income families. So resources as simple as books were now not within grasp. And so we partnered with ISS to put together a virtual book drive where we could donate these books to the kids. And I think the thing that what made it successful is that we were able to not only serve that part of the ecosystem, so these students who were in virtual learning experiences, but also from the small business perspective, which is core to Welcome to Chinatown's mission. So recognizing that Eastern bookstore on Elizabeth Street, the last Chinese bookstore in the neighborhood that we're aware of, at least, having a severe lack of foot traffic because they're also on a second floor. And so partnering with them to actually place that book order that used to come from schools like PS 124 and other public schools that are in the neighborhood, so that they also have a fulfillment of revenue. And so that's kind of been our approach in a nutshell, where we're pivoting in different ways as we're as different challenges and issues continue to surface with us. And I think that's how we've been able to get people engaged. And I won't go into too much detail, but I did also want to quickly touch on the Longevity Fund, which is a small business grant program that we had created as an address to the lack of public funding that was going back into Chinatown from other areas, such as PPP. Recognizing that it's interesting that even if there was an intent of wanting to tap into the neighborhood, not every single time did they know how to tap into those neighborhoods. And so they're looking to grassroots organizations within the neighborhood to help tap into these small businesses. And so from that, our answer to that issue was to create our own small business grant. And so to date, we've been able to distribute 32 of the 40 grants that we are fundraising for. And these are $5,000 micro grants to small businesses in a way that helps them address a lot of the financial burdens that they have accumulated over time since sheltering in place.
I'm happy to just jump into Toronto. So when COVID first hit, kind of like what I mentioned before, we were extremely concerned about how news around the development of the pandemic, but also about health and legal resources were reaching folks in our community. So the first thing that we did is we launched into a flyer, postering, and canvassing campaign with information about CERB, which is Canada's emergency response benefit. Legal advice for non-English speaking communities, workers' action, support for disabled and immunocompromised folks, as well as information about community housing, food banks, and meals in the area. And so this was something that we just put out into our community in Cantonese, Mandarin, and Vietnamese right as we went into lockdown. Since then, we've also done a few other projects with kind of what some other folks have mentioned with advocating our politicians. So this includes the development that we've been consistently fighting in our Chinatown, along with other digital direct actions that we've been doing with a lot of community partners. One is Toronto Prisoners' Rights Project, and another is with Asian and Migrant Sex Workers Network in Toronto, which has been repeatedly also harassed by Toronto's bylaw officers. And we also helped some small businesses like the Fiorama Bakery that Annie mentioned which closed down, to provide some mutual aid for their workers. A lot of folks who've been baking us delicious baked goods for decades and are now closing shop and retiring, and not the best time to sort of possibly transition into a new profession during a pandemic. So helping those folks get some adequate funding to stay on their feet since the business closed down. And because FOCT is all volunteer organized, we're really, really fortunate to be able to work with a large network of other community activists, organizations, just other great folks doing great work so that we can sort of band together. And again, because we're volunteer run, anytime we sort of sit on panels, anytime we go participate in projects and we're given a fee with that respect, we contribute that right back into the community, whether it's giving to these organizations and restaurants that need it or what have you. And then throughout the summer and the fall, we've also done some small fundraising campaigns just to pour it back into our communities as well.
I'm realizing I'm sharing the same time as Shelley as Fox, so I'll try to be quick with some other efforts that we've been doing. And I should actually backpedal a bit to talk about, quote unquote, the biggest issue in Chinatown. And FOC really was born out of the resistance of this development, which we're calling 315 Spadina. 315 Spadina is a 13-story condo development that will displace a handful of very important businesses in Toronto, including legacy businesses, including a Rolsan, which is a dim sum shop, a Vietnamese-speaking optometrist, or is it optometrist or dentist? Shelley, can you correct me?
It's Vietnamese optometrist.
Optometrist, and there's also a dentist there. So yeah, very important culturally competent businesses for the neighborhood, including herbal shops and a Hong Kong bakery. And so, and we know that with the loss of these businesses, also, we lose residents as well. And it is a form of type of a culture erasure. And so what I'm getting to is that we have been doing so much effort around fighting that development. And so when the pandemic hit, there was a sudden pause, and Spock sort of was figuring out the right way to respond. And then we learned in the summer of 2020 that development was going to continue, right while the neighborhood was in this state of vulnerability. The city gave green light for this development to move forward. And so half of the team kind of quickly switched gears into figuring out well, how can we amplify the voices of the community in the state of the pandemic? And so it was fairly a tricky effort, but we did lots of stuff in the summer. During stage 2, we were outside petitioning, also offering online petitions, and we gathered about over 600 signatures. We were able to get testimonies from residents, video testimonies, and had a social media campaign on why Chinatown was important. And, you know, and like I'm mentioning this, I feel like I'm quite proud of the work that we've done here. And we've really sort of pushed the developers, and we've really sort of put a footprint on giving the developers a hard time to to try to come into Toronto, Chinatown, even in this state of vulnerability. Okay, I'm just going to stop there because we've done a lot. I'm too excited to talk about it. And so Seattle, you take over.
So similar to Toronto, we've done similar mutual aid programs since the lockdown started. And some of those activities included helping seniors purchase groceries and delivering it to them, and also toiletries and items like that. We worked with Calgary Immigrant Women's Association to sew face masks for frontline workers that work in Chinatown, because a lot of the times the PPE that they're allotted is strictly for the seniors and they don't have anything for themselves. So we sewed reusable double layered face masks and donated those to Chinatown frontline social workers and staff of the different housing places if they requested them. Something else that we started, not inside Chinatown, but it's just up the hill from Chinatown, is the Calgary Community Fridge. And so you have these in New York and Toronto as well. It's a community pantry with a fridge, freezer, and it's accessible 24/7. It's 100% by donation. We raised $18,000 in about 2 days for this project, just from individuals that were like, I see the need. And I can donate $10, $20. Like, it was from thousands of donations of little bits of money, instead of having like one donor being like, oh, I'll give you $5,000. So what that's resulted in is we've been building a relationship with the Calgary Chinese Community Service Association. So a lot of their clients will now, they weren't able to do their food hamper program anymore because of the lockdown. And so what they do is they set up almost like an outdoor market where our fridge is located, and the seniors come. And once they came and saw that there was an actual fridge there, they've started coming quite regularly. Like, the demand has soared for access to food, because not only have seniors historically been very under a lot of financial pressure, because they only get about $1,200, $1,000 US or $900 US per month to cover rent, food. Like, there's nothing else for, entertainment, internet, TV, like, it's all very expensive. And so food's usually the thing that they spend the least amount of money on, unfortunately. And what that results in is a degradation of health. We don't have a ton of doctors in our Chinatown anymore. I love the idea of a health center, because a lot of our doctors are also aging out. And I would say that during the pandemic, what Terry said about our neighborhood becoming more attractive towards young professionals and young business owners is true. Like, we were really amping up, and people were really curious to learn about history. Like, we shared TikToks on Chinatown history, and people went wild because they were just like, oh, I didn't know about this. And then the lockdowns occurred. So hopefully next year or later this year, we can continue to build up people's understanding of the neighborhood and the opportunities that they have to participate as a business owner. Like, it's really attracting the people who are like, I'm woke, I care about my culture and my identity, I want to reconnect with it, and I want to provide a service back to the community, in addition to being an entrepreneur. It's like this whole social entrepreneur kind of thing. And so yeah, those were kind of like the main initiatives that we had from the more social side of things. And then I guess, Terry, you can talk about the business side.
Sure, thank you. Just before I go there, on the commercial side, the community side of the equation, as mentioned earlier, we were alerted very, very early. And we had what we call a mainland Chinese community that activated very early on by notifying people who were in China and on the way back January, February, that they would pick them up. They would pick them up, take them straight home. And when he got home, there were bags of groceries sitting outside their doors right away, so that they didn't have to go grocery shopping. So the first week of arrival was sheltered in place right away, quarantined right away, so that they minimize the outbreak. The other group is what we call the Calgary Chinese Community Service Association, located just outside of Chinatown, formerly in Chinatown, but they've delivered over the course of the last few months 2 tons of rice, 2 tons of bags of rice to all seniors that could or couldn't necessarily get out of the place there. The different restaurants in that also, and grocery stores in Chinatown also offered immediate services in terms of, you call us, we'll deliver to you. You don't need to come out and do that and that kind of thing. Again, as Alice referred to, we had a number of agencies having connections with China and whatever, having delivery of PPE sourced directly from China to Calgary and delivered, to a lot of the different agencies and senior residents there. So from a community side equation, I would say we pulled together really quickly, and as such, again, we're relatively COVID-free, and that. On the commercial side, as referred to previously, Canada, federal government and provincial government have a number of financial supports. The greatest problem we've had with the financial supports has initially been language translation. How do you understand all the different application requirements and navigate the websites and this and that? So the BIA went out there, and a couple other associations went out there to help these organizations navigate the subsidy channels and get the funds to them accordingly. And then over and above all that, as I mentioned earlier, on a commercial side of the equation, a lot of the businesses are not as sophisticated in terms of how to respond, how to react. They know how to clean their business out. They know how to restock their shelves. They know how to take care of a customer coming in, but there's no customers coming in. They were suffering. So I'm going to share a quick screen with you for just 2 seconds. This, no, I can't share. Cheryl, can I share a screen? Yes, no? Okay, if not,
Right,
don't worry.
let me try to,
Don't worry about it. I was just going to show you a couple a photo collage of different photos that we've used to really promote our businesses. And these are businesses carrying merchants and Calgary policemen and anybody. We'd walk around, we give them a sign, a Core Plus sign, just simply as Chinatown welcomes you. And this is a way to engage our residents, our businesses, our police services, anybody who wanted to broadcast who we are, so the rest of Calgary knew that, what, yes, we're suffering a pandemic, but we are offering Chinatown in a different sort of venue, different sort of vehicle, different sort of way of doing things, whether it be takeout, delivery, using seniors to come out, sorry, not seniors, families to deliver groceries to seniors, whatever. This is just one way of just promoting, doing it ourselves, helping our community and our culture. So again, those are the types of things that we were able to do. What I will say about our Chinatown and all of our organizations is that a lot of the organizations are, if I can use term, mature senior types people, and as such, there's not a lot of them. And because of COVID, they've actually been staying home. So we don't have a great tour de force of people. So again, those that have dedicated time to do this, it's an invaluable resource. And again, I appreciate everything that they have done. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so in Seattle, well, in our Chinatown, some of the efforts that we've done, all of them that I'm about to talk about are all because of the pandemic. Some of it we might continue on because we see the need for it within our neighborhood. But one of the biggest things that we've also been concerned with is the food security. As I mentioned earlier, the food bank in our neighborhood had to close. It just meant it moved to their larger facility where the volunteers and people could sort food socially distanced. So every week we deliver over 300 bags of groceries to some of our residents. And I think we started it in March, and I think we thought, again, we'd only be doing it for a couple months. And here we are in January, and we still do it at least once a week. And so we've delivered over 10,000 bags of groceries over this period of time to different buildings in the neighborhood, some of them being family association buildings with residents in it, some of them being other affordable housing buildings. And we have volunteers actually meet the driver there and then take the bags to each individual door to make sure that people can get their food safely. We also, our senior program in the neighborhood cooks food for folks and gives them hot meals for people over the age of 65, but we were noticing that there were families and people under the age of 65 that were like grandpa was getting his dinner and then everybody else just watched him eat. And so we were able to work out through some funding to actually purchase hot meals from our restaurants. So we were able to support our restaurants while they fed the residents in our neighborhood. And that was a really fun organization with 3 different restaurants and a bunch of to-go containers and wagons to take them around the neighborhood. And we ended up that being a big production of what we did for a majority of last year. We similarly saw a huge gap in terms of access to technology for our students that live in the, the K through 8 that lived, or the K through 12, I mean, that lived, in the district. And not only did not many of them have Wi-Fi in their homes, because a lot of them relied on the community center and the library, which is now closed. In order to check email, they didn't have a device in order to go to school with. So we spent quite a bit of time working with Seattle Public Schools to get devices. Some of them were donated from Amazon to Seattle Public Schools and to actually distribute them to families. And then I heard there was a lot of technical issues with troubleshooting and how to get it started and all that. And we had to work out with a couple different provider companies here just to get internet to some of our buildings here, because our infrastructure is incredibly old in our neighborhood and not a lot of it works well. And so that was a lot that we did on the residential side, just to support the families and to support the people living in the neighborhood. I specifically worked on our business relief team, which was comprised of our organization, RBIA, and the Friends of Little Saigon, which serves the Little Saigon neighborhood. And we formed the CID business relief team. In mid-March, we got contacted by Vulcan, which is was owned by the late Paul Allen, who was the other co-founder of Microsoft. And they gave us $100,000 to put towards a relief fund for the small businesses in the CID. We decided early on that 100% of that money was going to go to businesses. We weren't going to take an administrative cut off of it or anything. And then we decided to use it as seed money to continue to raise funds. And up until now, we've raised a little over $880,000, all of which every single dollar goes straight out to the businesses. So we've been able to do 3 rounds of funding to our businesses. We funded over 200 businesses where they just give us a W-9 and then they receive a check in the mail and they can kind of do whatever they need to do with it to pay whatever bills that they need to pay. We kind of trust that they know, and we're gearing up to do what we hope is our final round of funding. I think also thought that the pandemic would, we were like, oh, we'll do 1 round, and then here we are in round 4 that we're about to release, and we're hoping to do that around the Lunar New Year so that people can have that gift, of money. And we've also, similarly to a lot of folks on this call, have had to help businesses apply for the PPP loans, all the stuff from the SBA, all the different grants from the state, the city, the county that have come out that are all in English, all online. A lot of our, businesses are not technology savvy. They can't really do a lot of complex things in English. And so we've worked really hard to try to translate things. A lot of the guidance that has come down from the state has been in English on how you need to space out your tables, what things that you might get fined for, but they're not really clear, and they continue to be released in English, which is, I do not understand that at all. And so we've been trying to work really hard on making sure that our businesses are aware of all the opportunities and all the guidelines and all the things that they know to keep their employees and themselves safe as they have their businesses open. I think one of the silver linings that has come out of this is because a lot of this work, there's a team of about 7 of us that do outreach to our small businesses, because we've been able to call them, we've given them money. That really helps when you give people money. Our relationship with our businesses is probably the best it's ever been, because, it's a very, it's a relationship where they trust us now because, we have been here for them, even though it's over the phone or it's an email and it's not necessarily in person, but we're able to talk to them in language and things like that. And that's one of the best silver linings that I think that has come out of this entire pandemic, is we now have relationships with our businesses that is just so much stronger, which is ironic because we're not seeing them in person, but yeah.
I'm so impressed that your amount of funds raised is such a lucky number, $888,000.
We're trying to get to $1 million, but maybe we just leave it at that.
So next question about city policies. How have these new city policies that have been implemented during the pandemic period, how have they affected your Chinatown? How have you navigated them, and have you actually been able to access city resources?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in quickly on this. So earlier I had mentioned that New York City Small Business Services had put out the low medium income storefront loan. This was a loan program created specifically for minority communities like Chinatown, Harlem, Bed-Stuy, and where I think kind of the challenge was here was that they took in the approach of zip code basis, where something like a census tract would have made more sense because, as I mentioned, zip code 113 was excluded from that. So we are looking for ways that we can work closely partner with the SBS and other organizations within Chinatown community as well have been coming together to ensure that things like this don't happen again. Also ensuring that there are things taken into consideration, like is it zip code versus something like a census tract? To the point that I think I made earlier when we first started the conversation, is that it is so critical that the city's elected officials, public offices are really staying in tune with community organizations, grassroots organizations, people who are day-to-day boots on the ground, in order to ensure that they are tapping into those communities appropriately. I give my credit to Wellington and his team as well, because Cheryl, like you pointed out earlier, the bid has a wealth of information and statistical data that is really essential in order for cities like New York that have a wide, diverse and array of needs, that statistical information is communicated and funneled to those organizations within city funding or what have you, to ensure that they're tapping in. And so that's one of the resolutions that we are trying to reach right now as part of some of our advocacy work. It's interesting because I think when we first started Welcome to Chinatown, we didn't necessarily see it as advocacy first or activist first organizations. It was very much just about trying to inject as much additional revenue into these small businesses. But as things have unfolded over the course of COVID and just the economic recovery associated to that, we are starting to see more and more this need for as many loud voices as possible, and making sure that those that we have elected into office are actually taking the steps needed to address the concerns of the community.
Yeah, just to add on to what Jennifer said, she's absolutely correct. Chinatown is very fragmented. We are in 3 different community boards. We're in 3 sanitation districts. We're in multiple police precincts. And as a result, one of the unfortunate things is obviously zip code. We're splintered into 3 major zip codes or 4. And one of them, unfortunately, is this commingle with Soho, which is a very wealthy neighborhood, and Tribeca, and also all the way to the Hudson River. So Chinatown is more toward the Bowery side. East of Bowery is covered all the way to the East River, but anything west of Bowery that is in the different zip code is commingled with these wealthy districts. And so as a result, and that's also speak volumes about public policy. You need to have, sometimes this is the downside of term limits, right? So during 9/11, during Sandy, I believe some of the prior relief grants were also zip code based, but they didn't get a chance to pass on this lesson to the next time, right? So this time they now finally know that, hey, you really should not be using zip code as a determinant for a fragmented community like ours. And Jennifer is absolutely right. The reason why we keep on looking at data is because we're in a fog of war, as what Cheryl started this today, right? We're in uncharted water, we're uncertain thing. No one knows where the vaccine is, or if there will be a vaccine. Thank God there are multiple ones. And so if you're in a fog of war and you don't have data, you're lost. And so we are very fundamental in believing that data is lifeblood. And that's why we go out there and pound the street and just say, how many opened? How many are there? Who's there? Who came in? Who went out? And so regardless of what the noise is on the internet, what people are speculating, and you're entitled to your opinion, the facts on the ground are different. And so the lesson learned from this past year is also don't believe anything you read, especially coming out of the number 45. It's also, there's a lot of, half facts, half truths. So this is where we work on that part of it. And so it is about prioritizing what really matters. So unfortunately, the other weakness for Chinatown is also that we are very much cash-based. So a lot of times it's very hard to document the losses. How do you prove that, hey, where's your invoice? Where's your receipt? You didn't report it on your income or anything like that. And so this is a common issue for us. Every time there's a disaster, a fire, or a hurricane, a flooding, or like 9/11, they say prove it, even if you're allowed to apply.
We're trying to figure out who should respond. Shelley, do you want me to
Shelley and Annie, yeah, go ahead.
Annie, go ahead.
Sure. So I can talk a bit actually, specifically thinking about 315 Spadina, actually the lack of policies that were implemented in this time to protect the businesses and the residents there. And our Ontario government in last year introduced a law that actually made evictions much easier for landlords to do. And so the city of Toronto across Chinatown, across even beyond Chinatown, is facing mass eviction. And so what FOC actually has been advocating in the last year is a moratorium on development, 100% affordable housing, and a policy to protect cultural competent businesses. And we're using this state of the pandemic because we have seen the neighborhood fall into a state of vulnerability. And so my response to that question is actually, we're not, there's a lack of policy and resources for us, specifically in the context of 315 Spadina.
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear Terry talk a little bit about sort of the difference in business supports probably across Canada, for instance. But our province has released support for businesses, as has our federal government, but there have been some differences in sort of who's been able to access them. So for instance, I know that the provincial one was actually not, you don't apply through it as a business, but you apply through it through your landlord. And so a lot of property owners were not interested in applying for this subsidy, which would then be passed on to their tenants and these business owners because they could just, demand the same amount of money from their tenants without having to go through that additional red tape. And so now more recently, there's something called the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, which business owners can apply for directly to sort of actually have it benefit them more directly. And so for us, the Canadian Emergency Support Benefit that I had previously mentioned ended at the end of September. And it's actually quite funny because you can see the spike in COVID cases right after that, when people sort of had to go back to work immediately. And we were sort of proceeding with this business as usual plan. A lot of folks have also been asked to repay back their CERB payments because kind of like what Wellington is saying, we are a cash-based economy. And so there is a lot of paperwork that you have to present to be able to show that you're eligible for these government subsidies. In terms of sort of fighting against racism, our city did release a campaign about anti-Asian racism, but it's like a web page on their website, and it's a bit of information about why it's bad, but there's not a lot of resources existing around it or abilities to report it. Though we have been made aware that there's this really great organization called the Chinese Canadian National Chapter, which has been asking folks to report anti-Asian racism, that they're actively taking reports for and providing, sort of mental health resources to accommodate those afterwards. In terms of housing, so we've had a rent freeze for 2021. That's what we've been told from the provincial government. And then as of this week, it's been announced that there is a moratorium on evictions, but only for about 2 weeks. And we're in a state of emergency until at least the end of February at this point. So there's a lot of incongruencies between sort of like what subsidies are given and for how long they're for, because it seems like a lot of band-aid solutions for short term. So right now, eviction notices are still being noticed, and we're quite concerned that there will be a blitz of actual evictions right after the pandemic. And hearings right now are going on virtually. Most recently, we started working with a group in Toronto called Keep Your Rent to attend hearings and learn a bit more about this and how we can support tenants who are sort of facing this issue. And we've been hearing sort of worst case scenarios where children have been asked to translate for their parents at online eviction hearings because of, again, a multiplicity of sort of access barriers with this process. And just to echo Annie's point about development too, you know, the city has pushed forward on development, seeing it as a priority even at this point. And so it really begs the question of like, how important is an affordable condo building that's going to demolish some of our small legacy businesses, and is it appropriate at this time?
And sorry, just to note, and I'll leave it at property. But in terms of like the context of policy, Chinatown is very vulnerable, unlike our neighboring neighborhood, Kensington Market, that has something called heritage designation. They are allowed to resist certain types of development. Chinatown and other racialized neighborhoods like Little Jamaica in Toronto are facing, again, this sort of onslaught of development in the state. And so in terms of like types of policies, those are policies that really favor, you know, corporate development.
In Calgary, we've kind of seen what Shelley has talked about, the federal and the provincial wage subsidy programs, rent subsidy programs. There was a federal loan for $40,000, which is now, I believe, $60,000 for businesses that can apply. What I saw anecdotally, just from my day job as a property manager, is that a lot of my Chinese businesses could not qualify. Whether it was just the business structure, it was like, you know, they arranged their corporation and their, you know, in a way that helped them save money on taxes, you know, back in previous years. But during a pandemic, it's very hard to show that you were an employee and that you suffered a loss of revenue, because like they just couldn't show that loss. And an issue with a lot of the takeout restaurants right now in Calgary is that Skip the Dishes and Uber Eats and DoorDash and stuff charge quite a high fee of about 30%, 25 to 30% per order. And so even though the calculations of subsidies are based on a revenue, like their revenue has stayed the same, but their profitability has gone down. Like the money that they actually take home has gone down due to the increased surcharges. Like every $10 you make, 3 of it that would have been your profit previously would now have gone to Skip the Dishes, for instance. And so we're looking at provinces like British Columbia, who have led in terms of like capping what that delivery rate could be, because they, you know, it has put so much pressure on businesses who do take out. Like many have chosen just to close their doors until the lockdown is lifted, just because it doesn't make any sense for them to stay open. With regards to housing, I haven't at least heard of evictions or anything happening in Chinatown. However, when talking to the city of Calgary and when they're asking us like, what can we do to like, you know, make amends or whatever, I'm like, make it so that Chinatown has to have a certain percentage of affordable housing. Like, don't make it just so that necessarily, you know, oh, individuals have to band together and raise a bunch of money to buy a piece of land and then, you know, negotiate with the provincial government and CMHC to do affordable housing. Like, you guys should actually also write it into your planning, you know, documents, like the area redevelopment plan or whatever, to keep Chinatown affordable, not only for seniors, but like young families, if you want them to move in. Like, they can't all afford to move into 2-bedroom, you know, $1 million condos or whatever. And so they, you know, administration seem in, you know, happy to talk about the idea, but whether that's a realistic outcome is hard to say, because right now how city council makes their decisions is very like, you know, social good is really on the bottom of the list. It's really about tax base and revenue and density, and which I agree is important. I think density is important, but it can also be done from an affordable housing lens. And so yeah, I guess hearing from all the other cities, like Calgary's been relatively lucky, and we've had a lot of support and a lot of banding together, but there's still quite a bit of work to be done, especially on the racism front. Like I see people on the call who've been participating in Chinatown advocacy for 30 years, 40 years, and it's like that same emotional trauma and draining every time, and you're just like, it's kind of I and this might be a terrible analogy, but how women are always asked to prove that they were raped, and they always have to like go above and beyond and really convince the jury that this really happened, whereas the men are just whatever. That's kind of how we feel with regards to how Chinatown is faced, or is dealt with or acknowledged. It's just kind of like, okay, well, we've heard this before, and you're always going to be a community that complains. You're always going to be a community that's going to be difficult to work with. And luckily, council's priorities about, profitability and tax base and stuff is consistent across the city. We've started to see a lot of like mostly Caucasian neighborhoods facing the same outcome as us, where they've been lobbying, and it's just like the developers win. And so that's kind of changed things a little bit. But again, I think it will take electing members to council who actually understand what a holistic community building lens is, as opposed to just helping support profitability of buildings. So Terry, you can go.
Thank you. Again, we talked a lot about the federal provincial supports, so I won't get into that. From a municipal perspective, our administration has been very good. Our administration has been on top of, what can we do to help businesses, residences, community groups, this and that, with a lot of processes, protocols, applications. Because of the financial state of the city government, they aren't able to offer financial supports in any sort of way. Talking about policies and relationships, that's probably the greatest thing that is a bugbear, not only to Chinatown, but a lot of others. And I'll start with the political side, because that really drives some of the actions of council and administration on the other side of the equation. And that is that we've got a council of 15 people, and I would say 40% of them have a very idealistic perspective of what Calgary can be, should be. And they've held that long in their heads for the last 10 years, if not longer. Consequently, they're not as agile and responsive to some of the immediate issues that come up. So when COVID came forward as an example, in Chinatown, we responded right away. We had, federal ministers, we had provincial MLAs, the premier come on down, we had the Consul General from China come on down, and it took 2 months before the mayor and city council even came down, And when they finally came down, they didn't come down to meet with any of the associations. They picked their own choice of restaurant to go to at a lunchtime, and this is probably probably the third largest in terms of spatial area of a restaurant, of which there was only one table occupied besides them. And the consequence of that is the media said, "Oh, there's nobody in Chinatown." And yet at the same time, we tried to say, "Look, work with us. We'll create the news story for you. We'll create the sense of urgency for you." But again, the ignorance of them was that, no, we'll do it ourselves. So I had a backlash on Chinatown, had a backlash on them, because again, they didn't showcase effectively what the issues were all about. As Alice referred to in terms of property development and this and that, density is important. Density drives greater value per square foot, and therefore greater tax dollars, which is again a focus on their part. But the flip side of the equation is communities are not just property values. Communities are not just taxes. Communities are people. Communities are the people who live, work, play, invest, set up businesses, and need to thrive, right? And yet, we're seeing it today, even with tomorrow's Chinatown, even with the city of Calgary wanting to, their heads are focused in a whole bunch of idealistic sort of ways, as opposed to things that help the immediacy of boots on the ground, right? They want to, if I can use the term, put in, not to say they're bad, but they want to put in protected roadways for bike lanes and scooters. They want to convert some of our streets to one way. And as much as that form of transportation is great, they do it without consultation with the business. They do it without consultation with the community, the residents, the seniors, right? Oh, it's great. We want bike lanes all the way through here. Well, if you know our Chinatown is all about, we don't have a lot of on-street parking, loading zone parking. We don't have laneways behind commercial buildings. So where do these 3, 4, 5 ton trucks park? How do they unload, offload when you got bikes going back and forth, right? And yet we're being challenged saying, you know, you're just this NIMBYism. You don't want it in your backyard. No, it's not that we don't want a backyard. We see what a thriving community is all about. You're just being ignorant of who we are. And so when we talk about, I won't call it racism, but there's a systemic bias, you know, amongst certain members of council that therefore then drive our administration to say, oh, let's, you know, council's directing us to do bike lanes, so let's spend money on bike lanes. Council's directing us to do density, let's do that. Oh, and as Alice has referred to, the community social side of the equation, oh, the province is taking care of that. The federal government's taking care of it. We will focus on our own things. And that's been some of the systemic problem we've had, not just in Chinatown, there's other communities across the city. And the only solution to that is, I hate to say this, voting them out, right?
I think it's okay, Terry, you can call it racism.
Well, whichever way you want to look at it. But you know, I mean, you talk to some of these councils, which we call idealistic, they do have a compassionate part of them about the ethnocultural diversity in the community, right? But it's unfortunate their idealistic priorities get ahead of what the community's needs are, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Okay, thank you.
Jamie, Seattle.
Yeah. So, you know, when the pandemic first started, we started seeing a lot of utility deferrals and people that could apply for utility deferrals. And then also, we've also had a moratorium on evictions for commercial and residential, I think since, I want to say March of last year. And it just got extended again into March of this year. And one of the biggest concerns that we have is that, for example, for the utilities, they're not concessions, they're deferrals, which means that we're going to have residents, businesses, they're going to owe giant chunks of money that they'll never be able to pay. I guess utilities would be to the city, for example, or we know that commercial businesses that probably will owe tens of thousands of dollars to their landlord because their landlord has been either giving them a rent deferral through, you know, whatever, or they just haven't been able to evict that tenant when they couldn't be able to pay the rent. And so that's one of our biggest concerns is like, how are our businesses that are our residents that are going to be in a large amount of debt to their landlord, how is that going to, how are they going to fix that problem? We do have a pretty strict rule in the state of Washington around public money for private gain. So actually having the government come in and help for things like commercial businesses is actually not something that's really, it happens here. We have a pretty regressive tax system in the state of Washington. And so that's a really big problem that sometimes we don't see as an issue in other states in the US, like California or things like that. We also, and I think this is true for a lot of the Chinatowns that are on this call, we have a lot of small property owners, and we have a lot of small property owners that will also, you know, so we have the business that may not be able to afford to pay the rent, but we also have the property owner that's not going to be able to afford to pay their property taxes because they are not getting the income from the businesses or the residents, and they're still paying, you know, we also have to pay our utilities. We also have to, you know, have light, power, water. And so we're trying to figure out a way, how is it that we all recognize that nobody's going to come out at the end of this hole. Nobody's going to come out saying like, I was able to pay all of my rent and was able to get everything back. And so like, where can there be like the tenant paying a portion, the property owner paying a portion, and like, you know, the government of some sort coming in and helping pay. And that's, I think that there's something happening actually in New York that's looking at that model. Over at China CDC, I think is working on that, of like trying to figure out a way to recognize that, you know, I think one of the interesting things is that when City Council in Seattle was going through, you know, new budget allocations and things like that middle of last year, people kept saying, oh, but you're tapping into the rainy day fund, like we don't need that money. And I wanted to be like, you guys were there, like this is the rainy day that we've been waiting for, not really waiting for, but you know, this is the rainy day that everybody was putting money aside for, and this is what we need to do in order to make sure that, you know, people can survive this pandemic. And I think that those are some of the biggest concerns that we have coming forward, because we know that the moratoriums will be lifted at some point. And then what really happens, not only just like people getting evicted and increasing the amount of businesses that are displaced or residents that are displaced, but also what happens to the small property owners that are, the ones that keep this neighborhood from getting gentrified, that keep this neighborhood, authentic to itself, what's going to happen with them when they can't pay as well their property taxes. So that's some of the stuff that we've been working on this year. And I think it was Shelley or Annie that said that in Calgary, you guys have something in place to report hate and bias crimes. And we're also, I think it was Shelley that said it, we're also doing something like that as well here in King County around, a lot of the negative things that we're seeing coming out against Asians. And I think the county really, the folks at the county that helped develop this really took the opportunity of COVID to kind of secure funding and to kind of gather people, but really recognize how this is something that, Black communities have been asking for a really long time, is how do you talk about hate crimes and racism and not have to do it through law enforcement, and how do you do it through community, and how do you track those numbers and things like that. So that's some of the stuff that we've also been working on here.
So that was Toronto, I think that
was Toronto, yeah, I think it was.
So I know we're actually running, a little late. I'm just gonna ask one group question to y'all, and then we are gonna turn it over for any very, very quick questions from the audience. I know that storytelling is such an important part of community uplifting, and I've been so inspired by some of these amazing stories I've seen, mostly virtually on social media. I know Welcome to Chinatown, you guys have been highlighting small business owners in Chinatown, including one of my favorite little spots, the Me Some Cafe, which has, just lots of local delicacies, but it's really a forgotten and often overlooked little cafe. And I know, Focht, you guys have been making videos about people who've come to Chinatown and asking the question of what brings you to Chinatown. So, with the idea of the power of storytelling, I guess I'm just curious from you guys, to tell us quickly about one of your favorite Chinatown memories from the last year, from 2020, in any order.
I'm happy to start because I think this is a really good question to end off of, and kind of like Annie, I have many I'm excited about. But like I mentioned previously, our group is largely composed of artists and those working in the creative sector. We do have, everybody sort of has their unique ties to Chinatown, but I would say it's a strength of our group. And so again, with this development we've been fighting at 315 Spadina, one of the major things that drew us to this project was the fact that they had a giant development sign in the city talking about a building that would change the heart of our community, and it was in all English. And so as opposed to going to the city and saying, you need to change this up, we just made our own development sign and translated it because we're here to serve our community. And so this was something really quick and rapid that we did, and it was something that gave our group a lot of attention, something really foundational that, again, the city sort of should have done, kind of like what Terry is saying, not being consulted. And the videos that we did were really heartwarming and fun, and it's like 3 simple questions just for folks who use the neighborhood on a day-to-day basis. Why do you come here? What would a proposed development change to the neighborhood? What draws you to this place? Why is it unique, basically? And everybody has really wonderful, heartfelt videos, and I would be happy to share the link in the chat.
I guess I should follow you, Shelley. I don't know. I feel like even in these states of urgency and panic, there has been such lovely moments. I can name of even meeting over Zoom with and organizing with the team has been, and coming together to, even in the midst of all these limitations and restrictions, coming together to organize and to work and to continue our efforts, I think has been really lovely. And I also really love the garden that we tend to ever so often, even in a social distance way. And just to imagine that continues to thrive while we're all, while we're all just at home.
I'll go next because I do actually have to jump off in a couple minutes. I'm so sorry, but I think one of my favorite things is, Cheryl mentioned we've been doing these business spotlights, and actually the impetus of why we featured Me Some Cafe was because as we were doing individual spotlights of businesses, one of the most heartwarming and recurring things that we heard as we were interviewing business owners are also about the other places in Chinatown that they love. So it wasn't just about, what Chinatown meant to them individually and about their business, but they always, for some reason, it was always unprompted how much they loved the other businesses that surrounded to them. And so that's why we wanted to do this kind of mini series focusing on small business owners at their favorite Chinatown place. And, we've seen that there's so much about community that runs so deep within the neighborhood. As like one point of an event, July 4th in this last year was an opportunity where everybody within the community just kind of came out and did sidewalk barbecues. I'm sorry, Wellington, if we ended up doing anything that was outside legal confines, but it was a really wonderful day where it just felt like the first moment in a very long time where the community was able to reconnect, after everything that it had been through in the last several months.
Jennifer, perhaps you can also just chat your Welcome to Chinatown's Facebook address in the Zoom chat so everyone can follow you guys and see these business profiles.
Yeah. So I just add on to what Jennifer said, because as Alice Lam said correctly, the thing that stood out for me and my team is obviously the warmth and the love, right? We started the year by doing Send Some Love to Chinatown, which my chair is still listening in, and Frankie, thanks for all the donation. As well, I'll be remiss if I don't mention the warmth that's been generated. Rockwell donated over 6 figures. I do not know, they did not tell me exactly how many hundreds of thousands of dollars they donated to here, all the outdoor seating. In addition, they just donated all the heating and all the electrical wiring. I know they also went to Harlem, and so I will be remiss if I don't mention them, and plus all the food donors, all the people that donated to my workers that have been out there cleaning. And it's about, it is, as Jennifer said, about show some love. And then we see that even though we put our welcome to Chinatown on the trash can, but it's bilingual, but at least we also show the love for our iconic landmarks. We also put the landmark buildings on all the trash cans that are there. But I think at the end of the day, it's about the human story and connection. And so it's about being kind, being softer, being, caring to one another. So we're about to launch, as been publicized, a campaign called Have You Eaten? As you know, the Chinese way of how are you is not, how are you? Hey, even though that's nice, but it's really about 2 things. It's about caring for one another and just say, are you okay, basically? Besides highlighting the great food of Little Italy, they are suffering as well as at Chinatown. So this campaign will be asking for people to write their, if I'm down on my luck, what type of warm-hearted message, like a Hallmark card, would you write to put on all these roll-down shutter gates? What would you say to the owner hanging there? And so that is about to be launched, and we're working on the graphics. And so you're welcome to participate. We're entering a contest. The winner of the slogan will each get $100 or more. So look for that to come. So I won't get on, hog the mic.
So I'll just say one of my favorite moments, I think, was when we did our first round of funding to small businesses. It was in April, and I think it was kind of when people were feeling really alone and they didn't really know what was going to happen. And that's before a lot of the relief funding started coming down. And we started contacting businesses to be like, can you send us your W-9? We have a grant we want to give you. And of course, a lot of them were like, who are you? I don't trust you. This is a scam, and we had to assure them that it wasn't. And I just think the kind of response that we got from them, just like gratitude. Some people started crying over the phone, and like, it was just this, like, it was like we knew that we had made the right decision on how to do this grant and how to run the process. And it was really great to like hear that. And then a bunch of people were like, let me know if you want to stop by, I'll give you food, because that's what we do in our communities, feed each other. And so I think that for me, like, we were all sitting at our own computers at home, but to be able to feel a sense of community somehow, even though we were all in our own little spaces, was really great. And we also have featured a bunch of businesses as well as spotlights and folks that some businesses were doing okay, and they actually gave their money back to the fund so that they could go to businesses that would really need it. And so I'll share that link as well on this page.
Awesome. I can go next. I think one of my favorite memories was last year getting to meet like Cheryl and Annie. Like this was, you know, Cheryl was in Calgary right before the whole lockdown thing happened. And again, it was just the beginning of so many fun conversations with people who were sharing their stories about Chinatown. And I feel like all the work that we've done in the past, and I know I like harped on the city a little bit, but it's, you know, they have to be held accountable, you know, but moving into the future, like I would say that we are wanting to collaborate, and it is about community over profits. And it is about making sure that whatever decision you make, like don't forget that you are an advocate for the most vulnerable population in this neighborhood, which is the seniors, which are the businesses. And like this past year, you know, I would call around to the seniors that I personally volunteer with, and, you know, always worried, like, are you guys okay? Like, do you need everything? And they're just like, oh, it's fine. It's like, we're just hunkering down for the, for the year. We'll come back out. We're going to be okay. And it just reminded me that this neighborhood has gone through 100 years and fought through 100 years of this kind of, you know, worse situations. Being able to just sit peacefully at home is, you know, the least dramatic thing. Although, you know, obviously there are people who are struggling with like isolation, things like that. But that being said, in general, I would say majority of people are quite resilient and quite okay. And same with the businesses. I think Terry will agree, like talking to a lot of businesses, some were scared of the unknown, but many of them were like, you know what, like this happens, we've prepared for it in whatever way, mentally or financially, and we'll get through this and we'll band together and work. And what's getting me really excited is that we've had a lot of different generations of Chinese Calgarians who have been involved and kind of left the scene, but now are kind of coming back in again. And now they see that, hey, these people have been sticking around and fighting for Chinatown for a while. And it looks like they actually want to make some changes. And so now maybe is that time, you know, when it's like the right time and the right place. It's like, I think that Calgary's Chinatown is at that precipice kind of, you know, point where we can turn it into that vibrant, fun, engaging, educational, and thriving neighborhood that it can be, that people will want to protect for more reasons than just because it's full of restaurants or whatever. So thanks.
Yeah, if I can supplement that one. Probably not so much the greatest story, but the greatest sort of outcome that's come out of this last year has been the unification of our community, of the young and the old, the people who live within and outside of Chinatown, the different perspectives, whether you're a cultural or a business or whatever. That, you know, it's like a rebirth of a community that's you know, it's come out of the ashes, so to speak. And particularly the one area that I think is going to really emerge very, very strongly in the next year and 2 years onward is the arts community within Chinatown. Not only, you know, with, you know, again, as Alice said, you know, we met Cheryl and Annie as part of the Artist in Residence program. We've had murals put up. We've now established a murals and art community. We're talking about new street banners. We're talking about a whole host of things that is really going to contribute to the culture of what Chinatown is all about. That the visual representation of Chinatown, trying to keep with the authenticity of Chinese ethnocultural, trying to keep with the history heritage of the city, trying to keep with the future outlook of what Chinatown is all about. It's going to be represented in the visual arts representation in Chinatown. So I think of all the things that have come out of this unification, it's going to be that visual representation that's going to really take it off. Thank you.
It's been so confidence inspiring to hear all of these stories. I know it's been really challenging, really difficult to navigate all of these unknowns. And obviously this conversation is just one small little crumb out of a much, much larger conversation, because we are almost 2 hours into this, and I didn't get to ask 10 of the other questions I had planned. So we will just take one question from the audience. I know there's a couple of other questions coming in. I would just encourage you guys to be able to speak directly to each other to answer some of these questions. I really wish we had more time. But afterwards, if you would like, please send your contact information to the gallery at events@caac.com, I think it is. And we can send out the link for this recording of this video, as well as the contact information of all of the different organizations that participated today. So the one question we'll take from the audience is from Brad Lee. Congrats to you for typing the fastest. We always think about connections to Chinatown as a geographic location within cities, but has anyone thought about how Chinatown builds ties outwards to other communities where Chinese people also live? Feel free to just jump in, anybody who wants to answer this.
One of the things I think is very consistent with all the Chinatowns. Chinatowns have been established over the last century and a half in a core area, whether it be next to a transportation corridor, next to a river, next to something that was common. But what we've also seen over the course of the same century is that people have spread out to suburban areas. What our Calgary Chinatown is trying to create right now is a hub and spoke concept, right? Of all the different things you can enjoy in a Chinese community, you'll find it in Chinatown. If you want to go up to the Northwest, yes, you can get groceries, you can get in restaurants, but you may not get stores, schools. You may go to the Northeast, you may get to schools, but you may not get a museum, right? We're trying to promote the fact that in our central Chinatown, you'll get it all. But on top of that, we will support the surrounding regions, as long as you're willing to partner and work with us.
Any other takers? All right then. Well, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate everyone for being present. I know we also ran over time, so thank you for being patient and staying with us. Again, I was just about to type this in the chat box, but if you would like to receive the email about, with the link to this recording, or if you would like to be in contact with any of the other Chinatown groups that were on this call, please email the gallery, or you can email myself, and I will type that contact information in the box right now. And thank you so much, everybody, for being present. Really appreciate that. And yeah, any last words? No, we don't have last words. Okay.
A round of applause to Cheryl for pulling this together. This is a historic first, and so kudos to you, Cheryl.
Thank you, really appreciate that. And also I really appreciate all the folks who joined us, even my former colleague, Pat, who called in at 5 a.m. from Bangkok. Really appreciate how international this conversation and audience has gone. Thank you.
Okay.
Please email if you would like to stay in contact.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.